Kia ora, good evening. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge. Haere ake nei, bye-bye Mr Malloy, a leading Auckland mayoral candidate, bows out with a bang and a beer after a bad poll. A wild week in politics continues. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is forced to hose down bullying claims by one of her own MPs. More on the fake doctor who fooled County's Manukau DHB into hiring him. We hear from an expert on how on earth it could happen. The boats are back and so are the tourists. The first cruise ship since the pandemic docks at Auckland's waterfront for a fleeting visit. And pressure like never before. Can the All Blacks snap an unprecedented losing streak deep in enemy territory? And will the coach survive? You can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Auckland's most outspoken mayoral candidate says he hasn't got any skeletons in his closet, and low polling is one of the reasons he's pulled out of the race. Businessman Leo Malloy says he was worried that if he didn't pull out of the mayoral race, then he may be orchestrating a result for the left.
We had a stare down from the centre-right candidates. It ended up being a wee bit like Princess Diana's marriage. It was a bit crowded at times. I decided that I was the person who, having tried to steer them all down, I'd step away to leave another candidate to perhaps, hopefully, prevail and do the right thing by the city.
Leo Malloy says he isn't going away and plans to stand in the 2025 local body elections. Efeso Collins, Wayne Brown and Viv Beck are front-runners vying for the mayoralty in October. The Prime Minister says processes for dealing with employment problems at Parliament have improved since a 2019 review into its workplace culture. Labour MP Gaurav Sharma has alleged in a newspaper column there's widespread bullying throughout Parliament. The Chief Whip has responded that there were staffing issues in Dr Sharma's office. Jacinda Ardern says attempts to resolve the issues with Dr Sharma were the review into workplace culture in action.
Some issues have been raised, and it's our job to make sure that we're looking after staff and that we're making sure our MPs are the best employers possible. And so that's the work that's being undertaken. From my perspective, all I've seen is a constructive attempts to try and resolve these issues. Even when you engage in what you believe is a constructive way, others may interpret that differently. That is for us to resolve, but I do believe it can be resolved.
Jacinda Ardern says the priority is resolving the staffing issues that gave rise to the situation in the first place before addressing Dr Sharma's column. Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand says it's worrying that a fake doctor was able to practice at Middlemore Hospital, but it's working on safeguards to prevent such situations in future. It's been revealed that Yuvaraj Krishnan, who was trespassed from Auckland University 10 years ago for impersonating a medical student, was employed at Middlemore Hospital as a doctor. Te Whatu Ora County's Manukau has confirmed he was employed in the respiratory unit from February until Wednesday of this week. Health New Zealand says it supports the district's decision to refer the matter to the police. The Housing Minister says new incentives for developers of build-to-rent projects will enable tenants to put down long-term roots. New and existing build-to-rent developments offering 10-year tenancies will be exempt from interest limitation rules in perpetuity. This means developments of 20 or more dwellings will be able to deduct their interest payments against their tax bill. Housing Minister Megan Woods says the move will boost long-term rental supply and give renters more security.
It's about tenants being able to put down roots in their community. So, they can start school on day one and can finish school living in that same community.
Megan Woods says a number of social housing providers have already expressed interest in exploring rent-to-build opportunities. Auckland police are trying to identify human remains found at a house in Clendon Park yesterday. As Sally Wenley reports, the police say the investigation could take some time.
Detective Inspector Tofelo Whamanuia Valo says the remains were found when the residents of a house in Moncrief Avenue returned yesterday with an item they did not own. A homicide investigation has been launched and a post-mortem is expected to be completed over the coming days. He says the occupants of the house are not believed to be involved. Mr Valoa says efforts are underway to identify the remains and work out what has happened. He says extra police will be in the area over the weekend, but there's no risk to the public.
To sport, and the Springboks coach, Jacques Nenaba, doubts the All Blacks are ripe for the picking ahead of Sunday morning's second test at Ellis Park. The Springboks' 26-10 win in the first test last weekend was their biggest over New Zealand in almost 100 years. But Nenaba says the All Blacks never stay down for long.
I'm sure that they'll get it right. Our job is to make sure they don't get it right against us, but they've got such a good coaching side with so much experience. If you look at that team, if you see how many Centurions there are, they've got good rugby players. So I'm sure it will turn around.
Meanwhile, an extra test has been added to the All Blacks schedule. They'll play Japan in Tokyo at the end of October. The test will precede the All Blacks' end-of-year Northern Tour, which has matches against Wales, Scotland and England. The Warriors are hoping a change in venue will lead to a change in fortune when they return home to Mount Smart Stadium for tonight's NRL clash against the Bulldogs. After slumping to a 48-10 loss at the Souths last week, skipper Tohu Harris hopes playing in front of their fans again will be a boost.
Every time we've come back, the feeling in the group's been a lot different and the excitement picks up. So this has come at the right time, especially after last weekend.
The Warriors are 14th on the table with just 5 wins from 20 games, while the Bulldogs sit just above them with 6 wins. And also tonight, Nelson play Otago in the semi-finals of the Men's National Basketball League, with the winner to play Auckland in the final. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, crikey, even the toughest critic of Meghan Markle might want to stay the hatchet that biographer Tom Bauer brings down upon her. The woman who's calling Gloria Vale to account after 50 years of living there and refusing to leave so that she can bear witness. And Rushine Spooner, actor, singer and star of Thoroughly Modern Maui. Call Kim Hello. Join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Nick Trubridge. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine today. Showers tomorrow, especially about Auckland. Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, a shower or two for Bay of Plenty until this evening, and from southern Taranaki to Manawatu until morning. Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay, periods of rain, possibly heavy, with hail easing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay, also for Waded Upper and Wellington, mainly fine, but the odd shower, especially in the east. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, also Canterbury, North and Central Otago. Fine weather, morning frosts, severe in some places. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, cloudy periods, a few showers, more frequent about the south coast tomorrow morning. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, a few showers, more frequent tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll update you with the latest news headlines and any traffic news at about 20 past 5.
Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. Leo Malloy has quit the race to become next Mayor of Auckland, and he's gone down fighting. Declaring Cowboys Don't Cry, the self-proclaimed Hospo legend says he's realised he can't win after a poll showed he was third behind Efeso Collins and Wayne Brown. Fronting the media this afternoon, holding a Heineken in his hand, he's gone out firing shots at anyone and everyone.
I'm a hard bastard. Haven't you worked that out yet? Nothing hurts me. I'm a fairly bullish person. I'm a blue sky person. So I'm a front windscreen, not a rear vision mirror. And we just didn't see it coming. So I wouldn't do Guy Williams again. Nothing against Guy, but I wouldn't do it again. I can at times be a little bit obnoxious and a little bit out there, a bit edgy. And the remarkable thing there is that Efeso, you remember when you're at school and you go to the school dance and no one will dance with you? You're that spotty-faced kid sitting in the corner saying, pick me, pick me, pick me. Well, he went for about 3 months, didn't he, before anybody swiped right on him. Then finally the Labor Party did swipe right on him. They don't actually like him, but they swipe right on him. And now he's got the endorsement of Dick Hubbard. Well, hello, work it out. I mean, look at Viv, what's she been? She's been New Zealand Post and MFAT with John Allen. Then she went to rip the heart out of the city. That hasn't gone so well. Wayne Brown at least has a wee bit on his CV to say that I've been there, done that. Efeso's been on the umbilical cord of life for his entire working career. Has he worked? I'm an Auckland runner. Wayne Brown's not even an Aucklander, so you're like predators. You're like vultures circling the sky looking for a carcass, and I don't want to be your carcass, so ask Phil Goff. He doesn't answer questions, so ask him. I could take that. Do you want me to become one of those mayors who doesn't answer questions? I prefer to be the one who does answer your questions. I'll give you column inches and clicks. I think that's probably my strength. I'm never afraid to answer a question. Where I probably fail when my model breaks down. How's my Heineken looking, Freddie? Can I have a little freshener? Where my model breaks down is that you guys will listen to me for 45 minutes for one show and you'll print a paragraph. You know, I've got a great intellect and I can talk about most things, but you don't give me the opportunity. You tend to report the fluffy sizzle, you ignore the sausage. Let's make it clear, I haven't died or anything, it's not a funeral. Remember this, he's running again in 2025.
Yeah, going down swinging, that's for sure. Well, just before that press conference, I gave Mr. Malloy a call. This is what he had to say. People are going to ask, and I'm sure you're expecting this, whether there's something else going on here, whether it is just a poll and whether it is a genuine decision to step away. So here's your chance. Is there something else going on, Leo? Is there something else going on?
Well,
you've had staff leave recently. You know, what is there something going on?
Jumping at shadows. There's absolutely nothing going on. Absolutely nothing. I just come from the doctor, 130 over 80 blood pressure. I'm in great working order. No, of course there's nothing going on. Tell the sound of my voice, I'm a robust. I'm a hard bugger, so nothing going on. I just did the right thing by the city.
We're not going to probe, and in a few months, nothing's going to come out.
No, what could come out? What are you on about, weirdo? I'm not Ben Offendale, or whatever his name is. What's Sam Offendale? There's nothing. What are you? I've spent my whole life being microscopically examined by the media and never found anything, so you're not going to find anything now, I'm sorry. Sorry to disappoint you.
Tell us why. Tell us why today is the day that you've decided to pull the pin effectively.
Well, we've always said we'll go from poll to poll to poll to poll, and yesterday's poll wasn't a great poll, last night's poll, so it was pretty clear then, the writing's on the wall, that the trends were going against us, not for us. Someone had to make the decision to step away from the centre-right, and when it came to a stare down, I waited and waited and waited, and no one else showed any sign of weakness, so we made a decision to step away.
Last time I spoke to you, which was at your Ponsonby office, you were pretty adamant you were going to win. Your internal polling was good. Obviously, the external polling was looking pretty good as well. You were neck and neck with Professor Collins. So what's changed? You're not a quitter. You're not a quitter, Leo.
I'm absolutely definitely not a quitter, and that's why we're in the race in 2025. And at the moment, the trends weren't going well for us, and there's three of us in the same political space, and there's every chance that we were going to hand it to a FSO on the plate, and I can't have that, I'm sorry. I've listened to him debate 20 or 30 times now. I haven't heard him answer a question. He's been on the umbilical cord of life for his entire working career, and I'm terrified that he's going to bring the city to its knees, and I'll always do the right thing by the city, and the right thing in this instance was to step away. So,
Can you explain to me a little bit more why? Is this about your belief that the city needs a centre-right candidate?
Have you read the latest budget? What they hid in the budget? If you can read between the lines, if you know how to read a budget, go and read it. Have you seen what's happening with City Rail Loop? This city is maxed out in debt. Maxed out. 245% debt to revenue. Brisbane, for example, 102% debt to revenue. We are maxed out. We're living beyond our means. We've got $11 $12 billion net debt here, 30,000 per home. This city is a city in big, big trouble.
Who are you backing? Who are you backing now? Come on, give us an answer.
Yeah, I know. This is the problem. I don't really want to have to make that decision because they all have, apart from the FSO, he's a nice man, I might have to say he had some redeeming features, but politically they all have redeeming features. You could look at each one and go, you know what, that person there would be good for that little piece of work and the other one would be good for the other. But none of them are the whole package, and I don't feel like I should back anyone. I may well at some stage.
This would have to be, though, one of the first times, one of the rare occasions where you have a stare down and you walk off.
Well, what's wrong with that? You've got to do the right thing by the city. This is not about Leo Malloy.
What's next? What is next for Leo Malloy?
I'm heavily in the hospo space, so we bought a building about 3 years ago that we take over on December the 15th. So as we speak, I'm busy working on finishes, and that's micro stuff. But furniture schedules, and I've got a lot of work. I've got to refit this whole thing. It's a multi-million-dollar job, but it's a very good opportunity. Got to offer on a couple other buildings, same in the hospo space as well. So I've got plenty on.
How much do you think you've spent on your campaign? Because your billboards are everywhere, certainly in terms of, they're staring me in the face all the time. I was out in West Auckland the other day. You drive around a corner and there's Leo Malloy. So how much do you think you've poured into it?
We've put quite a lot in. So
Millions?
No, nothing like that. No. Enough to buy a nice small house in a little suburb like Mayoral. You got to fund everything yourself, and you get to the stage where you're thinking to yourself, you know what? I've got 5 kids. I could either maybe go and buy the kids a little house each, or I can keep spending money on a mayoral campaign.
What needs to change in Auckland?
A lot. It's fiscal responsibility for a start. Activate the city. Try and turn it back into a livable city. Try and somehow give it a heart transplant. Put a beating heart back into it. Try and address the central government attitude, the prevailing attitude of Wellington. We're Auckland just a supplier. We have to beg to get anything back from them by way of resources. financial support, ideas. We need a bit of independence.
I've got to say, I'm surprised you've lost, because you've got all these ideas, right? And you've got a platform, and it's one bad poll.
Oh, yeah, but it's 8 weeks out from the election. And as I said, if I stayed in beyond lunchtime today, I would have been guilty of a terrible transgression. I would have picked up, on a bad day, 30,000 votes, on a good day, 60 or 70,000 votes, just because of name recognition. I've got very high name recognition. That would have been so unfair. It wouldn't have been democratic. Would have been really unfair to the other candidates, and I wouldn't be able to live with that. I would effectively have been, as I said, orchestrating the result of a local body election, and that's, in my view, fairly unforgivable. It's very third world.
Can I ask why you did have a few staff leave, and I've never really asked you about it. So what was behind that? Was it just not on the same page, or did they move on, or what was that?
All on good terms. So one was a volunteer but left on good terms, and the other one was just on a month-by-month, left on good terms. No issues there. So I know you'd like to find something there, but there's just nothing there to discuss.
It's 5:15. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that. Fighting words from Leo Malloy as he exited the mayoral race today. Are you glad he's gone? What do you think about his decision? Would you have voted for him? And if you're somewhere else in the country, of course, we're coming up to local body elections. Have you decided who you're going to vote for? You can text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Right, the Prime Minister is disputing claims bullying is rampant in the halls of power after a Labour backbencher, Gaurav Sharma, hit go on an explosive column in the New Zealand Herald. The Labour MP for Hamilton West has laid low since penning the column, alleging a bullying conspiracy that goes all the way up to the 9th floor. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Gaurav Sharma implicates the Parliamentary Service, the Labour Party's whip's office, even the leader of the opposition, in his column claiming bullying is rampant and facilitated in Parliament. He also takes deliberate aim at the Prime Minister, writing politicians often talk about changing the system and kindness, but the charity must start at home. Jacinda Ardern says that home is a positive anti-bullying place.
I can tell you I've never worked with a group that's better. While no one can claim perfection, I'm confident that these concerns relate only to Gaurav's situation and don't reflect a wider issue.
Labour's Chief Whip, Duncan Webb, says he and the Parliamentary Service met with the Hamilton West MP as recently as yesterday. In a statement, Mr Webb confirms there had been issues between Mr Sharma and his staff dating back at least a year. The Parliamentary Service recently hit pause on new hires in his office with the intention of providing support before more people were brought on board. Jacinda Ardern says politics is a tough gig, especially for newcomers.
Starting out as a new MP can be challenging. One of the toughest parts is navigating the new environment, but also the role that you must play as an MP managing others.
The Prime Minister says since the employment issues have been raised in his office, Mr Sharma has approached both the Whip's office and a member of her office for an alternative solution. She stands by the processes taken.
Ultimately, at its heart, this relates to an employment matter within his office where we've sought to find resolution, which hasn't always been welcomed. It's our job, however, to find a constructive solution. From what I can observe, I've seen no evidence of what has been framed as bullying, but rather attempts to create a constructive, long-term solution to this problem.
Ms Ardern says she's reached out to Gaurav Sharma to offer support. Mr Sharma has been lying low since leaving Parliament yesterday, the House now entering a week of recess. He can't be reached by phone either.
Kira, this is Gaurav Sharma. Unfortunately, I won't be available to take your call or messages on this phone number for next few days as I'm overseas.
Mr Sharma isn't overseas, rather returning to his electorate for the recess week ahead. His office was locked up this afternoon and while he'd planned a constituent clinic at a local pharmacy this evening, it's not clear if he'll be attending. His constituents had mixed feelings about the explosive column.
I think that could be a good thing in a way.
It needs to happen more, but it needs to be obviously done in the right kind of way too.
Definitely not decent. It's not decent at all. It's not respectful.
Since the 2019 Debbie Francis review, Parliament has introduced a code of conduct and work is underway on setting up an independent commissioner to investigate complaints. Labour's Chief Whip remains committed to reaching a resolution with Mr Sharma in the coming weeks.
Right, time for some of your feedback on Mr Malloy. Of course, his decision today to withdraw from the Auckland mayoral race. It's coming in thick and fast. The first text in simply reads Piker, I repeat. And the second text, I think the right, and this is what Leo was talking about today, I think the right is consolidating around Brown. Of course, that's Wayne Brown, the former Far North Mayor, now running for the Auckland mayoralty. Another person, Heather, says, glad Leo is gone. Our city does not need to be represented, she says, by a coarse, foul, ego-mouthed egomaniac. Leo has just jumped before something came out, this person says. And to finish us off before we go to the headlines, another listener says, I'm voting for Viv Beck. Keep it coming. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz. Email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But now here's Evie with the headlines. Now here's Evie with the headlines. Here we go. Welcome, Evie.
Tēnā koe, Nick. The Prime Minister says processes for dealing with employment issues at Parliament have improved since the 2019 review into Parliament's workplace culture in response to Labour MP Gaurav Sharma's allegations that there's widespread bullying throughout Parliament. Auckland's most outspoken mayoral candidate, Leo Malloy, says he hasn't got any skeletons in his closet and low polling is one of the reasons he pulled out of the race. He says he was worried that if he didn't pull out of the mayoral race, then he may be orchestrating a result for the left. Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand says it's worrying that a fake doctor was able to practice at Middlemore Hospital, but it's working on safeguards to prevent such situations in future. Yuvaraj Krishnan was employed in the respiratory unit from February until Wednesday of this week. Auckland police are trying to identify human remains found at a house in Clendon Park yesterday. The police say the investigation could take some time. They say the remains were found when the residents of a house in Moncrief Avenue returned yesterday with an item they didn't own. And the mongrel mob's Waikato chapter is running a weekend hui on trauma, which aims to put its members in touch with the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care. The mongrel mob was born out of state-run boys' institutions in the 1960s, which the Commission has been probing over the past few years. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the main centres in Canterbury, State Highway 71. Kaiapoi to Rangiora due to emergency maintenance near Flaxton. Please expect significant delays or avoid the area. We'll have the latest news headlines and any traffic news for you at about 5:40.
Thanks, Evie. It's crunch time for the All Blacks this weekend, especially the coach, Ian Foster. The side's lost 5 of their last 6 tests, and New Zealand Rugby's hardly been glowing in its support of Mr Foster, meaning lose this weekend and it could be all over for him. Well, reporter Leonard Powell popped out to ask people if they would be watching the game, which kicks off at 3 a.m. this Sunday morning.
It's too early in the morning for me, mate, but I'll grab it when it's on the rerun or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, probably. I know, I'm going to watch.
Maybe. I'd say so. My husband will be.
Have you got a score prediction?
27-13 for the Springboks.
I'll think of 20-12, something like that. Sweet. South Africa have been the losing team.
32-20 to South Africa.
Do you want to see South Africa win?
Yeah, I'm Irish, so I'm really happy. We're number 1 in the world, so yep.
I always want my home team to win, to be honest. I'm a bit of a sore loser when it comes to losing. New Zealand better win this time, to be honest. We can't have that embarrassment with Ireland and all the other guys, so I hope they can beat the Springboks, to be honest, yeah.
They're quite capable, so just have to keep fingers crossed.
You have to go for the All Blacks, yeah.
Have you still got faith?
I have faith, yes. We're going to do it.
Joining me now in the studio is sports reporter Clay Wilson. Evening, Clay. Let's start with, there's plenty at stake here, isn't there? Really, run us through.
Understatement of the century.
Run us through exactly what's at stake, because there are a few things, obviously.
Well, I mean, apart from just the fact that this All Blacks team hasn't won in the last 3 games, I've lost 5 of their last 6. But, I mean, the obvious and most major one here is the situation around Ian Foster and what's going to happen there. I mean, we don't know if things perhaps have already been decided behind closed doors, or if he does have one last chance this weekend. But it's a big game, and I think it's told this week in some of the things we've seen and heard around the All Blacks camp.
A big game in a pretty harsh location, right? Tell us a little bit about Ellis Park, about its reputation as a ground to play footy at.
Yeah, well, you only have to listen to the likes of Beauden Barrett, Richie Mo'unga talk this week about what it means. You know, obviously they play there. They have played in the past a lot as Super Rugby, but it is renowned as perhaps like the biggest cauldron in world rugby. South African fans are pretty frenzied, but at Ellis Park, and then you add in playing on the high veld, the altitude there, and what it does to athletes that aren't used to that. You know, they talk about that burning feeling you get in your lungs. You know, if you haven't gone for a run for a while and then you get out and you push yourself a bit hard.
You'd hope they had. Changes to the side. You mentioned Beauden Barrett. He's on the bench. Richie Mo'unga comes in to play first 5, and there are a few others.
Yeah, 3 others. So, I mean, the Richie Mo'unga change in for Beauden Barrett is perhaps the biggest, but both props have been swapped out after this perhaps perceived scrum issues last week. There was some penalties got dished around in the first half, and then things came right in the second half a little bit. But they've swapped those 2 props out, and also Shannon Frizzell comes in to the loose forward trio. Now, Shannon Frizzell is a big man, and we know about the South African team, a big, imposing, physical
They
team.
ran over us last week, really, didn't they? In the forwards.
And from the outside looking in, it looks like they've brought someone like Shannon Frizzell, and a bit bigger and a bit more physical than someone like Akira Ioane, to try and remedy that situation.
Just before you go, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. A prediction, if not score, give us the victor at least, because I know. Well, you've predicted a few scores in the past and they've been wrong. I've done the same. Yeah. You go and then I'll go.
Rightio, that sounds fair. Well, my prediction is South Africa to win, but what I will say is that I wouldn't be shocked if the All Blacks won. I mean, you have to remember this is a team that always has very good players, and this team does have very good players, and they're always capable of winning against any team based on who they have. I know that the TAB had the All Blacks at $2.70, South Africa $1.50, and I actually thought that was reasonably fair. I think if I was predicting, I would pick a narrow South African win. I think all the evidence has to point towards that, but wouldn't be shocked if it went the other way.
Yeah, I'm probably the same. I think the South Africans, but I think a better effort from our guys, and maybe, you know, I suppose there's losing badly and there's losing in a fighting effort, isn't there? So hopefully we can, if it is a loss, we can at least go down fighting this time, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Clay. Sports reporter Clay Wilson there on, of course, that All Blacks test this weekend against the South Africans. A hell of a lot riding on it, not least of all Coach Ian Foster's future, of course. Right, a fake doctor who worked at Auckland's Middlemore Hospital has the whole health sector on alert. Yuvraj Krishnan worked in the hospital's respiratory unit for 6 months. The Ministry, Health Minister and Middlemore are remaining tight-lipped while a police investigation is underway. Te Whātau Ora Health New Zealand says it was already considering clear, standard employment practices for hospitals around the country, but acknowledges they need to be more robust. Sam Hazeldine is founder of MedRecruit, which is Australasia's largest medical recruitment company. He joins me now. Evening, Sam.
Good evening.
Let's start with, I suppose, the recruitment process that Middlemore and that counties would have gone through here. What would you expect it to look like based on what you know? What checks and balances should there have been?
Look, before you start any doctor, there's a number of things they should have and probably did do. There's, your reference checking from at least 2 people. You've got to check someone's medical degree. You've got to check their medical registration. And you've got to check their work history.
So if those checks aren't completed, can we end up in a situation like we are now? Why are they so essential, I suppose the question is?
Well, I mean, they're critical because, this is a very specialised job. And so you've got to know that the person who's on the floor treating patients is the person they say they are. And as importantly, you've got to know that their work history, that their skill set, that, their qualifications are exactly what they say they are.
You've got about 2,000 doctors on your books, right? So have you ever come across situations like this where maybe doctors you're dealing with either aren't who they, claim to be, don't have the qualifications they claim to have, or who maybe fudge qualifications, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, we've actually got about 70,000 doctors on the book. But so we deal with a lot of doctors, and we've been dealing with doctors for a long time, and we have pretty robust processes for reference checking, for checking people's medical degree, checking their medical registration, and a few times we have found discrepancies in what the doctor is saying, and what we're finding, and so we've headed that off at the pass. But, we know that people get through. And what's got me thinking about this and concerned about this, got me started thinking about it in 2017 when there was that fake psychiatrist in Waikato Hospital, pretty well publicised. But here's the thing. If there's one end of the spectrum, which is what we've got, at the moment in Middlemore, which is, someone who never went to medical school but wasn't a medical student, not a doctor at all. And then you're going to have, there's going to be a spectrum of from completely not a doctor to people fudging work history, fudging skill set, things like that. And so I think that we're in a position, and we've been doing some work on this, where we really need to move from a very analogue, very manual process, which can be, subverted to a digital process, leveraging the possibilities of digital technology, what technology can do.
How do you actually stop something like this from happening? How hard is it?
Well, as I said, with the analogue process, if you do everything, by the book, you should be able to stop it. If you're checking a university for someone's medical degree, which is the extent that we'd go to when we bring doctors into the country, that's very hard to get around if you're not just taking the doctor's, here's the phone number to call or whatever. You actually do your own checks. So there is a manual process that works. However, it's very, very time consuming. And and so if you've got a system under pressure, is it possible that people will take shortcuts? It absolutely is. And so that's where we have built and we're keen to engage with the ministry around digital identity for doctors, because we have built technology whereby you can have a digital identity for a doctor. You can create essentially a network that verifies a doctor's work history, a doctor's skill set. And then you can tie that digital identity to, things like facial recognition, so that the individual who actually turns up on the day for the first day of work is tied to that digital identity. Essentially, you create a network of connections, and over time, as that network builds, it becomes essentially impenetrable. It's a bit like a blockchain.
So you've come up with this technology, have you, or at least you've pitched it to the powers that be? We were in conversations with them last year, but it got pushed out because of all hands on deck for the COVID vaccine rollout. Rightly so. It was much more of a pressing issue facing New Zealand. But my hope is that we can pick it up again with them, because we have the technology and we have partners who we've worked with on this. That we wouldn't be particularly far away from being able to, build and run a pilot in New Zealand where we start to do this. And I think, the timing of this has just, sort of highlighted just how important it is. And if you think about a medical workforce, you've got your permanent doctors. Now, these are the ones these are the high-profile cases that we've had, like this person. It seems it would be very... those are the ones that should certainly have had, everything done to make sure they're a doctor. But then you've got contingent, doctors and nurses, that locum workforce who are coming in, coming out. They could be doing, 2 days here, a week there. And the challenges we have when we look at it from a medical staffing perspective is you could do all the work, you could verify someone, and then what if that person who turns up on the day and says that I'm Dr. John Smith isn't actually that doctor? So
there are places where the system can fail, and I think that's where we have to close out those loops and not just move from an analog to a digital and replicate what we're already doing, but actually make it a whole lot better, a lot more robust.
Thanks, Sam. That's Sam Hazeldine there of MedRecruit, of course, on that doctor who found himself employed by Middlemore Hospital when, of course, he wasn't a doctor at all. Cruise ships are officially back. Woohoo, cruise ships are officially back. I'm probably going to go on a cruise if I get some time off at some stage, maybe. Who knows? Round the islands? Maybe, we'll see. The pandemic ground the industry to a halt, but the first liner in more than 2 years has been welcomed back in Auckland. So our visual journalist and reporter Samuel Rulstone went down to have a chat to the people.
On a picture postcard perfect Auckland day, this was a welcome sight for downtown businesses. Sunshine and a kapa haka welcome greeted the 1,200 passengers on board the Pacific Explorer. Draped with a sign on the front, Kia ora New Zealand, a small number of vessels helped guide her in with waving and cheering. And the passengers were just as happy to be here.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Bloody awesome.
I've been wanting to come here for years.
It's a gorgeous place. I've been wanting to come here for years as well. First place I've been to internationally.
Nice to have great weather. We've had crap weather all the way over, so it's been great just to step on New Zealand land. So it's good.
How long have you been waiting to get here?
Oh, I've never been here. I'm 48 now and I'm finally on soil.
The industry has felt the impact of COVID in a big way. You only need to cast your mind back to the super spreader events on the Princess boats in 2020 to see why cruise liners became known as floating petri dishes. Now there's a vaccination requirement, masks, sanitising, testing, as well as quarantine cabins for any passenger or crew who might test positive. Despite only docking in Auckland until mid-afternoon today, jubilant passengers soon fanned out across the Auckland waterfront, keen to explore what they could in the short time frame.
Just to see what sites you've got compared to our sites.
I'm going to go to the shops and get something to eat, then go bungee jumping. Get a good coffee.
Heart of the City Interim Chief Executive Steve Armitage says lots of businesses in the waterfront area have been eagerly awaiting the return of cruise tourism.
Talking prior to speaking to you, actually, to a small tourism operator who runs tuk-tuk 2-hour tours around the city centre, he's saying he's had bookings off the boat this morning. Now, for a small tourism operator like that, that's gold dust. It's been such a hard time for those smaller players. So to finally feel like there's some momentum and some optimism as we head towards summer is fantastic.
Commercial Bay was developed with cruise tourists in mind, and Centre Manager Andrew Trounson says the return of cruises brings a crucial, long-awaited cash flow.
The cruise industry generates about 500 million per annum. So it's massive financial kind of impacts for all of the operators in the CBD to really get the vibrancy and the energy back. That's what has been exciting about this morning, is just feeling the energy.
General Manager of Hotel Britomart, Clinton Farley, says while the passengers of the Pacific Explorer are only here for a few precious hours, their arrival is a sign of what is to come.
It draws a line in the sand of the past couple of years where it's been really challenging for our tourism overall, and it just signifies a new launch to tourism and a really exciting future ahead.
The next major cruise ship arrives in October, before just under 1,000 port calls for the upcoming summer season.
It's 5:37, time for our business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, surprise, food prices are going up. Tell us what's new.
Well, they have gone up for sure. We're talking about an annual increase of 7.4%. And in recent months, we've seen these types of increases. And this was no exception. The monthly increase was over 2% as well. And some of the reasons for that, not surprising, are meat and poultry. Well, meat, poultry and fish, up 7.7%, and non-alcoholic beverages up 4.6%. The next biggest category were restaurant meals and takeaways, that sort of thing. That was, it was mostly, takeaway foods that went up. I have the number somewhere here. Also, in grocery, just to go back we had an update from Fonterra today talking about how the dairy sector is looking really strong. And certainly these numbers show that. Amongst the monthly increases that were really strong were cheddar cheese, up 4.5%. And that's just in a month, right? We're not talking about annually. And Eggs, so these are barn-raised eggs, they rose 4.2%. So this is the sort of thing that's really going to be hitting people in the pocketbook.
Is there anything in the supermarket that you sort of look at and that you maybe you pick it up, you have a look at it, then you look down at the price and you think, I'm going to put that back? Because for me, and I'm going to get bladed by our listeners for this because I know they're out of season, but it's the capsicum, $4.60 for a capsicum.
Oh my
for
goodness.
one capsicum
Oh my goodness.
at my local supermarket, $6 for an iceberg lettuce. Is there anything you see?
I always put the lettuce back if it's more than $4. That's ridiculous.
That's too much.
I mean, it's only green lettuce.
Yeah.
You might as well get something else, like a carrot. That's cheaper.
Yeah. Good
Let's go
alternatives.
carrots, potatoes, the basics, right?
Let's look at the manufacturing sector because it's expanding again. What numbers have you got for us?
Not expanding very much, unfortunately.
Okay.
And the expansion is mostly in those larger manufacturing firms, not in the smaller ones. And that they've been doing it really tough. Production is still in contraction. So there's a lot of strange numbers in these overall ones. What was strong was employment. So employment's back in expansion, but then where are these people coming from? Because overall we know that unemployment is really low. The labor market is tight. So that means someplace, somewhere, people are moving around. That means there's gaps growing someplace else. And there's no way, because we don't magically have a whole lot of new workers.
All right, from manufacturing to markets, whip us around, would you?
Yeah, all right, I'll do that. Okay, well, we rose 29 points today, which is pretty good, because yesterday we were I think, a 1 point down.
Yeah, bad day.
Yeah, so that was a rise of 0.25% to 11,731. And the dollar is stronger again, and that's really the news there isn't so much about our Kiwi. It's more about the big dollar, the US dollar, that is dropped quite a lot, and that's partly because there's an expectation now that the US Federal Reserve won't go as hard on interest rates. We shall see, though. So we're at 64.6 US cents, 90.7 Australian, and 53 British pence. So good news for those people travelling abroad this weekend. Good luck to them.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks, Nona Peltier there with our business news. Right, the mongrel mob is sitting down with victims of abuse in state care this weekend. The mongrel mob was born out of state-run institutions for teens in the 1960s. It's those institutions that are now under the spotlight for mistreating children in their care and has been the subject of the Royal Commission of Inquiry. There's a sense gang members have been reluctant to engage, something the Waikato chapter of the mongrel mob is out to change. Jimmy Ellingham has the story.
In a couple of hours, Paul Zentfeld, a former patient of the child and adolescent unit at the notorious Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital, will speak to a room full of mongrel mob members and their families. He'll tell them about his experiences there in the 1970s when he was drugged and given painful electric shocks as punishment. Mr. Zentfeld's story begins a weekend hui in Raglan about trauma run by the Waikato mongrel mob kingdom in what's thought to be a New Zealand first.
Where'd these people come from, male and female? They come from the government institutions, and so they've had no support, no help, and too many have taken their own lives. Too many. Something's got to be done.
That could include getting gang members to share their stories with the Royal Commission and register for compensation and other redress, something Paul Zentfeld says is important.
They have got a human right to be part of this whole abuse and care inquiry. No government's going to stop this. We're going to make a difference here. So there's thousands of them, they told me a couple of days ago.
Thousands of lives shaped by childhood abuse. Waikato Mongrel Mob Kingdom Public Relations Officer Louise Hutchinson says the hui includes workshops on topics like trauma and aggression. She says some people may not be ready to look back on past trauma, but they should be given the chance.
We just felt it was time to have the opportunity to run an event surrounding that. A lot of people still aren't really aware that the Commission's on or what it is about because they're just so busy living in survival mode.
Louise Hutchinson says bringing Royal Commission staff into a setting comfortable for gang members could help break down barriers.
They need to have their voices heard, and I think with the climate of crime and violence in the nation as it is, and everyone saying pretty much it's all the gangs' fault, well, the gangs have their own story to tell, and I think that needs to become, just like the land wars and just like Polynesian Panthers, it needs to become part of the educational system. We need to tell the story of where this all started.
Gang expert Dr. Jared Gilbert says while some gangs or chapters grow more antisocial and criminal, others are moving in the opposite direction.
The mongrel mob Waikato, particularly in a mongrel mob sense, is in many ways breaking new ground. They're acting in ways that we really haven't seen the mongrel mob behave. This hui is an example of that.
He says it could be a hard task overcoming suspicion of agencies such as the Royal Commission, even though it's independent. It's sending 3 representatives to the hui, and head of Te Tiriti Engagement, Julia Whaiporti, says their main role is to listen.
And we know that there is a pathway and a connection between abuse that occurred in state care and those that look for community within a gang setup. So it's really important for the inquiry that we are talking with and accessible to all survivors to share their experiences.
No one knows exactly what to expect, but the Waikato Mongrel Mob Kingdom says the weekend's hui won't be its last, dealing with trauma and abuse in care.
It's coming up 5:45. Kia ora e te iwi, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Trubridge. We're keen for your feedback tonight on, well, anything really. Mr. Malloy, we've had plenty coming in on that, about the fact that he is not going to be running in the Auckland mayoral election after all. Cruise ships are back. Are you happy to see them back? Are you thinking of taking a cruise yourself? Where are you going to go? And of course the All Blacks, the big match on Sunday morning against the Springboks in the cauldron, as Clay called it, that is Ellis Park. How do you think the boys are going to do? Do you think Foster should stay on? Do you think he should stay on, win or lose? You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now time for the headlines with Evie.
Tēnā koe, Nick. The head of the Property Council says the announcement of tax relief for build-to-rent developments will attract more institutional investors to the sector. New and existing build-to-rent developments offering 10-year tenancies will be exempt from interest limitation rules in perpetuity. I'm having trouble with that word tonight. 8 of the dolphins, which had been stranded on Waiheke Island, are heading back out to sea. A pod of 10 common dolphins stranded on Whakenefa Bay on Waiheke Island at about midday. A homicide investigation has been launched in Auckland after human remains were found at a house in Clendon Park yesterday. A post-mortem is expected to be completed over the coming days. The US Attorney General has asked a Florida court to unseal the warrant that allowed FBI agents to search the home of the former President Donald Trump. It's been reported the FBI was looking for documents relating to nuclear weapons when they raided his Florida home. More shelling of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been reported, with Ukraine and Russia again blaming each other for the attack. And Johnson & Johnson will stop making and selling its talc-based baby powder around the world from next year. The company faces tens of thousands of lawsuits from women who allege its talcum powder contained asbestos and caused them to develop ovarian cancer. Those are the headlines. It doesn't appear that there's anything else to report for you on the traffic front. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Iwi. Iwi. Evie.
Man, we're a pair tonight, aren't we?
You're messing up words. I'm messing up words. Hey, it's Friday night, and it's time to get stuck into the weekend, isn't it? Right. I'll try that again. Thanks, Evie. Developers who go big on rental blocks can now get tax relief if they offer homes to tenants for 10 years. The government package announced today applies to new and existing build-to-rent developments of 20 or more units, and they only have to offer 10 years. Tenants can say no and leave with 56 days' notice. So I asked Housing Minister Megan Woods how it'll all work.
So tenants need to be offered the opportunity to have a tenancy for up to 10 years. We're not putting any onus on tenants to have to take a 10-year tenancy. But, if you're going to create a special asset class, there does need to be something special about it. And for us, that is the ability for people to put down roots in their community and have the option to stay there. So up to 10 years if they want to.
But the tenant can then come back and say, well, actually, I want a shorter lease. The landlord can accept that, and away you go. You're eligible for that tax break from that point.
Absolutely, but they need to be on offer. So it's up to 10-year tenancies and 56 days notice to break that tenancy for tenants there as well.
So if a tenant does decide to leave the tenancy, well, before that 10 years is up or before whatever they've agreed to is up, does the landlord then have to go back to market offering another 10 years, or if there's 2 years already used up, does it become 8 years?
No, it would be they have to offer the tenant a 10-year tenancy. This is about tenants being able to put down roots in their community. So, their kids start school on day one and can finish school living in that same community. I think the thing which is a bit of a mind shift for New Zealanders around this, of course, these are long-term assets. So all of the developers that I've talked to and the people that want to get into developing these don't have a problem with offering tenants up to 10 years of tenancy. These are assets that will stay as rental properties for a very long period of time, and they're wanting to see their tenants be able to put down those long-term roots.
There are a few hoops to jump through, though, aren't there? So how many landlords do you actually have lining up for this as of today?
So there's a number. We had today when we made the announcement quite a few developers that want to get in to really bring in some pace and some scale to a category of housing we just don't have in New Zealand that most other developed countries.
Sorry, Minister, how many though? Do you have a number?
Oh, yeah. So at the launch today, we had about 8 or 9 people who are already doing this or wanting to get into it. That it is something that the development community and property developers, I've been working with them a period of time, see huge potential over this and what it can mean. But just being another piece of puzzle of how we solve the housing crisis in New Zealand.
This extends to existing developments as well, doesn't it? So how are you going to get them on board? Are they going to have to prove to you that they are offering these 10-year tenancies?
Absolutely. They'll need to come in and meet the criteria. But this is a special class. There is a carve-out. And there is special treatment, so there does have to be something special about them, and that is that they do have the up to 10-year leases. That there's some technical stuff around there being at least 20 houses in the development. That doesn't all have to be one single block. It could be in contiguous pieces of land, but they have to fit the criteria, and I don't think anyone would quibble over that.
What if the landlord wants to end the tenancy as opposed to the tenant?
Oh, well, I mean, if there's just reason why a tenancy would be finished, like someone has been clearly flouting their obligations as a tenant, they can be. But these are properties that they only qualify for their tax exemption if they're long-term rental properties. So what we have in our current rental market, of course, is a lot of people's tenancies get ended because the landlord wants to sell the house. And wants to move on. It might be their retirement income and they need to sell up to free up that cash for themselves. This is a different way of looking at rental property.
What about rent increases? Will you be keeping an eye on those? Are there any protections for tenants in that case?
No, we had a look at whether or not you'd embed that within the class, and the decision we made was that that wouldn't work for a number of reasons. But where I do want to see a lot of activity in this special class, actually, it's the affordable end of the market, particularly with community housing providers, with iwi, and with other groups who we've been talking about who want to do this, who really want to fill in that missing bit of our housing market between our public housing and the market, so that we used to have something we called social housing, and it was affordable, but of course with the sell-off of state houses and setting community housing providers and then Housing New Zealand up to compete against each other for the income-related rent subsidy, that really meant we've whittled down that part of our sector, and I'm really hoping that we can rebuild. And certainly we had, at the announcement today, we had the Housing Foundation, we had people representing community finance who we've been talking to about the potential for this in the affordable sector as well.
We're just going to change tack slightly. Your colleague Gaurav Sharma has obviously made a number of accusations over the last 24 hours or so, including accusing the Labour Whip's office of gaslighting. There's accusations of bullying, and there's accusations of the Labour Whip's office working in conjunction with parliamentary services. Were you and your colleagues blindsided by this one?
Oh, look, I think we've seen both the Labour whips and the Prime Minister talk extensively about this today and put out statements. I didn't know anything about it until I read the article yesterday, and I don't really have anything to add. I don't know any more than that.
Sorry, Minister, to interrupt, but is there a problem in the party?
Absolutely not.
It's 5:53. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. When Healthline was overwhelmed with COVID calls last year, leaving people waiting hours on hold, Māori health workers picked up the phones to save lives. Well, today, 3 iwi organisations from Te Ika ao Maui signed an agreement with New Zealand Telehealth Services to make sure calls are answered. Sam Ollie was at the ceremony.
Te hauora o Ngāpuhi, Te Tai Whenua o Heretaunga and Te Arawa Lakes Trust signed the partnership at the Waitangi Treaty Grounds this afternoon. In the past year, their kaimahi, or workers, have answered 46,000 inbound calls and made 274,000 outbound calls to people about COVID immunisations. More than half of those conversations have resulted in vaccine bookings. But Te Arawa Lakes Trust Chief Executive Karen Verco says that's just one part of the call centre's life-saving mahi.
So our whānau have talked down some whānau that were in isolation that were basically about to commit suicide. We had a number of those. We've had whānau that have been in dire circumstances and we've been able to support them.
New Zealand Telehealth Services has contracted $15 million in funding to the iwi providers to create around 300 jobs during the pandemic to date. The National Hauora Coalition's Clinical Director Rawiri McCree-Jansen says te reo, even a simple kia ora, is essential for Māori patients.
It's really an endorsement and affirmation, and it builds the relationship really quickly, and we get good results from that.
Te Tai Tokero's vaccine hesitance is so strong that this month it still hadn't reached the 90% double-dosed target. Te Hauora o Ngāpuhi was one of the first organisations in Aotearoa to start mobile COVID jab clinics. Chief Executive Tia Ashby says the call centre is still lifting vax rates and boosting the economy around kaikohe.
Some of the kaimahi that we've now employed in the call centre, they were unemployed. They were on a wrong pathway with drugs and alcohol. They've now had the opportunity to have earn an income, a salary, and also to go into training education pathways.
3 have gone on to start nursing. Ms Ashby says telehealth is improving access to care during a workforce shortage and a cost of living crisis.
Some can't afford petrol, they can't afford to operate a vehicle because it's really costly and expensive, or it simply could be that a mother can't take 5 of her children into the practice.
The Waitangi Tribunal found last year the government had actively breached the treaty in the pandemic and was giving little heed to the needs of Māori. Andrew Slater, the Chief Executive of Whakarongoro Aotearoa, New Zealand Telehealth Services, says his organisation has taken note. But does today's agreement mean iwi call centres will be a permanent part of our health system now?
That's my dream and that's my desire, and my colleague and fellows chief executive officers. That's why we've woven ourselves together.
Mr Slater and others hope other iwi will join the partnership named Taki o Autahi, the Southern Cross.
For a nation world famous for its dairy produce, a growing number of Kiwis are choosing milk alternatives. If you're thinking about trying them, how do you choose? Taste is important, but what's the healthiest? And is it sustainably produced? Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi investigate.
From oat to goat, the milk aisle can be a daunting place for shoppers nowadays. Plant milks are becoming increasingly popular compared to the classic cow's milk most of us have grown up with.
According to New Zealand Functional Foods, oat milk sales more than doubled last year. Globally, the plant-based milk industry is worth $12.4 billion and is expected to reach $22.9 billion by 2027.
So what's the carbon footprint of what's in each carton? Bruce Kidd from the University of Auckland has been researching the emissions of different diets. He says these are the things to look out for when choosing your milk.
Obviously, first one, greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously that's the emissions that's involved with producing the product, it's involved with packaging the product, transporting the product. Another one is land use. So basically, how much land does it take to grow, produce this product? Water use, so how much water does it take to produce that product?
Other things to consider are if the packaging is recyclable and what fertilisers are used. But Bruce says it can be hard to get a gauge about where everything is coming from on the back of the carton. Country of origin labels are only compulsory for single ingredient foods, leaving milks out. Checkpoints narrowed things down to dairy, goat, oat, soy and almond milk today.
So in terms of almond milk at the moment, so what we know is that it does have quite a high water use. So it is the highest of the plant-based milks, but it is important to note that that's still half of the water use compared with dairy milk.
And it's important where the almonds come from. The closer to our shores, the better. Next up, oat milk.
It is relatively low in terms of land use, water use and greenhouse gas emissions. We also know is that it acts as a catch crop. So what that means is that it captures the excess nitrogen in the soil. So that's really good because it means that it doesn't get into our waterways.
Certain Kiwi brands also grow their oats here. Soy stacks up about the same, but Bruce says it's all about where the beans come from.
If they are coming from somewhere such as South America, for example, we do know that that is linked with deforestation. So that's a really good thing to kind of note and make sure that, again, when you're looking for a milk, where is that source, that primary source ingredient coming from?
Goat and cow's milk pack a bigger punch.
While it is locally sourced, which is great, those emissions are still very high compared to the other plant-based alternatives, even though those ingredients are coming from overseas predominantly.
Bruce has two winners when it comes to environmental impact.
Generally, in terms of environmental impacts, soy and oat are kind of your best options.
When it comes to our health, dietitian Kate Sayers says dairy and non-dairy alternatives are important. We need about 3 serves a day to get adequate calories, protein and calcium. That's about a cup of milk, a pot of yoghurt and about a matchbox size of cheese.
And that video from Louise and Marika will be on our website. A quick bit of feedback from John. Leo is cool, he says.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. Ko iwi Ashton tēnei. Outspoken mayoral candidate Leo Malloy says there's no cover-up with his decision not to run for Auckland's top job. The polarising businessman says his approach has been to gauge his chances of winning poll by poll. But he's told Checkpoint the most recent poll indicated the result could slant to the left if he remained in the running.
It's pretty clear then, the writing's on the wall, that the trends were going against us, not for us. Someone had to make the decision to step away from the centre-right, and when it came to a stare-down, I waited and no one else showed any sign of weakness, so we made a decision to step away.
Leo Malloy says he plans to stand in the 2025 local body elections. The Prime Minister says attempts to resolve issues in Labour MP Gaurav Sharma's office weren't necessarily welcomed. The first-term MP has gone to ground after penning a newspaper column decrying what he called rampant bullying and gaslighting at Parliament. But the Labour Chief Whip says there were issues between Dr Sharma and his staff, leading to a hiring pause in his office while further assistance was provided. Jacinda Ardern says she can see no evidence of what's being framed as bullying, but rather attempts to create a long-term solution to the problem. The Housing Minister says developers, social housing providers and iwi have expressed an interest in the government's new incentive for build-to-rent projects. New and existing build-to-rent developments offering 10-year leases will be exempt from interest limitation rules in perpetuity. This means developments of 20 or more dwellings will be able to deduct their interest payments from their tax bill. Housing Minister Megan Woods says it will help housing providers who want to step up.
We really want to fill in that missing bit of our housing market between our public housing and the market that we used to have, something we call social housing.
Megan Woods says the policy is designed to boost long-term rental supply, give tenants more security and allow them to put down roots. Auckland police are trying to identify human remains found at a house in Clenton Park yesterday, but say it could take some time to work out what's happened. The discovery was made when the residents of a property in Moncrief Avenue returned yesterday with an item they didn't own. A homicide investigation has been launched and a post-mortem is expected to be completed over the coming days. Detective Inspector Tofilo Whamanuia Whaelua says the occupants aren't believed to be involved. He says extra police will be in the area over the weekend, but there's no risk to the public. 8 of the dolphins, which had been stranded on Waiheke Island, are heading back out to sea. The pod of 10 common dolphins stranded on the Whakanefa Bay on Waiheke Island about midday. Doc's Emma Kearney says one juvenile dolphin returned to deeper water just before 4 p.m. She says just before 5 p.m, a further 7 dolphins were successfully refloated and headed out to deeper water. One adult dolphin and one calf died earlier today and have been taken to Massey University for study. Gang expert Dr. Jared Gilbert says some gang chapters in New Zealand are moving away from crime and antisocial behaviour. But speaking ahead of a weekend hui on trauma organised by the mongrel mob Waikato Kingdom, Dr. Gilbert says it's a complicated picture. He says gangs that are moving in different directions are typically made up of older men whose priorities in life are changing.
The mongrel mob Waikato, particularly in a mongrel mob sense, is in many ways breaking new ground. They're acting in ways that we really haven't seen the mongrel mob behave. And this hui is an example of that.
The hui aims to educate mongrel mob members about the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care and let them know how to have their stories of abuse heard. Police have confirmed a body found at Cape Foulwind near Westport is that of a man who went missing at Maduia Falls. 26-year-old Mikhail Buchanan failed to surface after jumping into the water in June. Police say they hope the identification of his body brings his distressed family some closure. The former US President Donald Trump has said he won't oppose the release of the warrant that allowed the FBI to search his Florida home this week. The Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has asked a court to unseal the legal document, saying it was in the public interest. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports.
The federal agents involved in the Monday morning search of his sprawling estate have faced strong criticism from Mr. Trump's supporters and senior Republicans. The search is believed to be part of an investigation into the handling of presidential papers that were removed from the White House when Donald Trump left office. The Washington Post newspaper, citing sources familiar with the investigation, is reporting that classified documents relating to nuclear weapons were among the items FBI agents were searching for.
And Johnson & Johnson will stop making and selling its talc-based baby powder around the world from next year. The announcement comes more than 2 years after the healthcare giant ended sales of the product in the US. Johnson & Johnson faces tens of thousands of lawsuits from women who allege its talcum powder contained asbestos and caused them to develop ovarian cancer. It'll replace the talc-based powder with an all-cornstarch-based baby powder. To sport, and it might be bravado to support embattled coach Ian Foster, but hooker Cody Taylor is adamant the All Blacks are making progress despite floundering in their worst losing streak in nearly 25 years. Taylor's been recalled to the bench for Sunday's clash against the Springboks at Ellis Park after being dropped for the last weekend's 26-10 loss, which was the All Blacks' worst loss in South Africa in nearly 100 years. We keep repeating that and it doesn't get any better. It was also their 5th defeat in 6 tests, the team's worst run since a 5-match losing streak under John Hart in 1998. Foster maintains losing a rugby championship test to South Africa is no reason to panic and is upbeat about turning things around.
Dropping one against South Africa is not unusual, and there was enough growth in our game last week for us to know we're in the right direction, but we just got to keep making those steps and the challenge doesn't get any easier.
Meanwhile, an extra test has been added to the All Blacks' end-of-year tour. They'll play Japan and Tokyo in late October before heading to Britain for tests against Wales, Scotland and England. The Warriors are hoping a change in venue will lead to a change in fortune when they return to Mount Smart Stadium for tonight's NRL clash against the Bulldogs. After last weekend's 48-10 loss to Souths, the Warriors sit 14th on the competition ladder with just 5 wins. The Bulldogs are just above them with 6 wins. And English Premier League football matches will have drinks breaks midway through each half this weekend, with temperatures forecast to reach 37 degrees Celsius. That's the news.
This week on Country Life, 2 brothers, one a butcher and one a farmer, have started a boutique butchery on the family farm.
We're making a real effort to be different to what is out there in our size, our business structure, what we're actually farming, how we're farming it.
Country Life, Friday night after the news at 9 and Saturday morning at 7 on RNZ National.
We're the only butchery in New Zealand that we know of that's specialising in pure Galloway beef.
You're back with Nick Trubridge on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula fine today. Showers tomorrow, especially about Auckland. From Waikato to Kapiti, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Mainly fine, a shower or two for Bay of Plenty until this evening, and from southern Taranaki to Manawatu until morning. Gisborne and Northern Hawke's Bay, periods of rain, possibly heavy with small hail, easing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay, also for Waded Upper and Wellington, mainly fine, but the odd shower, especially in the east. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, also for Canterbury, North and Central Otago. Fine weather, morning frosts, severe in places. Cloudy periods for Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland. A few showers, more frequent about the south coast tomorrow morning. And for the Chatham Islands, Kohu, a few showers, more frequent tomorrow. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6. I'll update you with the latest news headlines at 6:30.
No, my hockey mai, there's been a dramatic development in the FBI raid on Donald Trump's Florida estate. The Washington Post is reporting the FBI was looking for documents relating to nuclear weapons when they raided Trump's home. Meanwhile, an armed man clad in body armour who tried to breach an FBI building in Ohio has been shot dead by police, the ABC's Barney Porter reports.
The 42-year-old man was armed with a military-style semi-automatic rifle as he tried to breach the FBI's Cincinnati office. He failed, and after fleeing to a rural part of Ohio, he became involved in a standoff with police and died in a shootout. Lieutenant Nathan Daniels is with the Ohio State Highway Patrol.
Obviously, situations like today are unfortunate. They're unfortunate for a community. They're unfortunate for those involved in it. And this is just a reminder of, I guess, how quickly things, in a community can turn into an issue like we've seen today.
Lieutenant Daniels was careful not to make a direct link between the gunman's actions and the FBI raid on the former president's home. But the New York Times is reporting investigators are looking into whether the man had ties to extremist groups, including one that participated in the January attack on the US Capitol. Earlier today, the Justice Department asked a federal court to unseal the warrant the FBI used to search Mar-a-Lago. It seems the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, finally appears to have realised the Justice Department's silence since the raid created a vacuum for bitter verbal attacks by Donald Trump and his allies.
The department did not make any public statements on the day of the search. The former president publicly confirmed the search that evening, as is his right.
LA criminal defence attorney Joshua Ritter.
I think some of this has to be viewed as a bit of PR recovery by the Department of Justice because of the media attention. I think that surprised them, perhaps caught them off guard that they didn't already have a statement prepared on this.
But he says it may already be too late to repair any damage.
If this really is the end of it, and this was really just about archived materials and presidential records acts, and all they wanted to do was recover these items, I think, Mr. Trump has already enjoyed donning this role as a martyr, and this will further feed into that.
But the next immediate step is unclear. Donald Trump has until tomorrow to object to the release of the documents, and it's not known how much information would be included if they were made public. Joshua Ritter again.
The only unknown, I think, is what step Trump and his team will take next. And if they allow for the warrant to be released and the underlying supporting evidence for that warrant, then there's really not much more to the story, I think. But if they object somehow, then that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows about, well, what is in the warrant or what's in the attached supporting evidence of the warrant that the president doesn't want out. And so that could be another interesting twist in this already incredibly interesting story.
The next US presidential election will be held in November 2024. And ever the showman, Donald Trump at this stage is still content to tease his adoring followers with suggestions he'll run again.
Ukraine's president is accusing Russia of nuclear terror after days of shelling at a Ukrainian nuclear power plant. Kyiv and Moscow are blaming each other for the attacks. Some shells landed close to where radioactive material is stored. Meanwhile, the UN says the plant should have been included in a demilitarised zone. The ABC's Isabel Rowe reports.
Europe's biggest nuclear power plant has been under Russian control since Russian forces invaded Ukraine in March. It's been under attack from rockets for days, sparking small fires nearby. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is waging what he calls nuclear terror.
For years, no one ever thought that Europe could be under the threat of a new disaster on a nuclear power station, not because someone breaches the safety protocol, but because a certain country would use the station as a means of terror. This is what Russia is doing now.
Shelling has hit an administrative office and several radiation sensors have been damaged. Ukraine's nuclear agency says radiation levels are under control, but the agency's head, Petro Kotin, has told Al Jazeera continued shelling is dangerous.
There's a risk of losing the external power to the plant, and it is dangerous because there will be then blackout mode, and they will be starting diesel generators, and if they stop, then you will have like melting of the nuclear core of reactors.
In response, Russia's defence ministry has released a statement saying Ukraine is attacking its own facility. The United Nations Security Council is meeting in New York this morning, calling for the area to be declared a demilitarised zone. US Under-Secretary for Arms Bonnie Jenkins has told the meeting Russia is violating international nuclear safety agreements.
We once again call on Russia to cease all military operations at or near Ukraine's nuclear facilities and insist that Russia immediately return full control of the Zaporizhzhia facility to Ukraine.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has been pushing to be allowed access to the plant to do safety checks for months. Russia's UN ambassador has told the meeting his country is happy to cooperate. It comes as European defence ministers meet to pledge more money to Ukrainian military efforts. Danish Defence Minister Morten Bodskov says countries have committed an extra €1.5 billion.
Today, 26 countries, as well as the European Union, have met here in Copenhagen and have sent a clear signal. Ukraine's fight is our fight. We stand together and we stand with Ukraine.
The British Defence Ministry has promised to send more multiple launch rocket systems to Kyiv, designed to fend off Russian artillery.
Thousands of people have fled wildfires raging in the south of France. It's just one of many areas suffering through a summer of extreme weather in Europe. In the UK, temperatures climbed to almost 37 degrees, while much of Europe has been hit by severe drought. The BBC's Mark Lowen reports.
A cloak of fire shrouding southwest France. A landscape of beauty turned to horror as flames tear through the Gironde, destroying almost 7,000 hectares, fanned by winds, searing heat, and France's worst drought on record. A tranquil village last week, a ghost town this one, with 10,000 people evacuated. Firefighters and planes have come from across Europe to help France manage a nightmare that keeps recurring.
We must continue more than ever to fight against climate change, and we must also continue to adapt to it. We will begin debates on a new national climate change plan this autumn.
Elsewhere in Europe too, fires rage. In Spain, Galicia is one of a dozen regions battling them, while in Portugal, flames have destroyed more than 10,000 hectares of forests, scarring the night sky.
Paris may be looking glorious in the sunshine, delighting its tourists, but we are of course facing a very serious situation. Crops across Europe are dying, worsening the global food crisis linked to the war in Ukraine. And extreme droughts and heat waves that were freak events are now becoming more common and progressively worse.
France's fourth successive heatwave is being lapped up by some, but despite the pleasure, they know the pain is deepening.
I think if this summer has taught people anything, it's like this is happening, and it's happening now. These temperatures are extreme, and if people don't start to act, it's only going to get worse by the looks of it.
Because we are the new generation, we had to live in this planet, and it's going really bad, and we are a little worried about our future.
France is taking the heat of what we are doing to our world. The postcard beauty may look stuck in time, but the planet is changing, and there's fear of what's to come.
It's 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some of your feedback now on the cost of living, which we spoke about with Nona, of course. Susan's written in saying, yes, you are right, salad greens and capsicum are both out of season. Eat to the season. I know, Susan, good advice. I'm a bit of an egg for even picking up a capsicum. I do love them though, on a pizza and some salad. Bloomin' good. In Papamoa, Lynn writes, mandarins from Countdown yesterday were priced at $6.49 a kilo. Lynn says she chose 3, then put them back in the display area and bought a can of peaches instead for $1.80. Well done, Lynn. It's hard to beat canned peaches, isn't it? Right, for decades, mysterious sinkholes, some so deep you can't see the bottom, have been appearing across farmland in central Turkey. But more have appeared in recent years, thought to have been caused by intense drought, pushing more farmers to pump underground water to irrigate their crops. The ABC's Tom Joyner reports.
It all seemed to happen so suddenly. One moment, Mustafa Ajar was cooling off in the shade after an afternoon's work tending to his flock. The next, he'd left and returned a short time later to find an enormous hole in the ground, in the exact spot he'd been sitting.
It all happened within a couple of hours. The ground opened up. My shed is destroyed.
Mr. Ajar is a sheep farmer from the Konya Basin in central Turkey, the country's agricultural heartland. And peering over the edge of the hole, it had this distinct cylindrical shape. It was about 7 metres across and who knows how deep. In other parts of the basin, in cornfields and paddocks, or even near village streets, others were reporting similar strange occurrences.
We're concerned about the increase in sinkholes every year. The sinkholes must be contained. Human life is at stake.
Professor Fatullah Urek leads sinkhole research at Konya Technical University. All told, his team has counted more than 2,500 of them across the Konya Basin. He says, although sinkholes have existed in the region for decades, in recent years their numbers have multiplied faster than ever. And a big factor behind that is climate change.
The main reason for the increase in sinkholes is the ongoing drought. The Konya region receives half the rain of Turkey's average.
So as drought becomes more intense and farmers are growing more water-intensive crops like corn, they're becoming much more reliant on water pumped from underground. And that, Professor Urek says, is what's leading to so many sinkholes. In fact, it's so bad now that since the middle of last century, the water table has dropped 50 metres.
If we deplete the groundwater in this area, we will have no other source. We need to use it sparingly.
Meanwhile, locals are getting nervous that sinkholes are appearing closer and closer to where people live. Shahada lives in a village on the Konya Basin called Obruk, which literally translates as sinkhole. Over the last 3 decades, he's watched as sinkholes have appeared on neighbouring farms. And now he's beginning to wonder, does this traditional way of farming even have a future?
We just don't know how the underground water table, which has decreased so much in 30 years, will look in the coming decades.
As for Mustafa Ajar, the farmer who discovered the sinkhole next to his shed, the whole thing has left him shaken, but he's determined to stay, even if the idea of another sinkhole terrifies him. We will live on here, he says. There's nothing else we can do.
It's hard to forget the chaotic scenes from Kabul 1 year ago. People were so desperate to leave Afghanistan before the Taliban takeover, they were trying to hang on to US military planes as they took off. While CNN's Clarissa Ward was on the ground reporting as America's longest war came to an end, and now she's back there again. Here's her snapshot of life 1 year after the US withdrawal.
We're at a market. There is a sense of normalcy on the streets of the city. There is not the same sort of or anything approaching the levels of chaos and violence that we saw playing out during those heart-wrenching scenes last year. But the change has also brought about a real decrease in the standard of living here. And a lot of people are now fighting to put food on the table. The UN says that nearly half the country is in a state of acute hunger. The International Rescue Committee says by the second half of this year, they believe, well, we are now in that second half of this year, more than 90% of people will be living below the poverty line. And that's for a whole plethora of reasons, partly because of sanctions and the freezing of Afghanistan's federal reserves after the Taliban took power, partly because of the food crisis, partly because of inflation. But what you see when you go around, and I just want to show you a little bit, seeing as we're here in this market, you can see there is food. There is food that you can buy. The market stalls are full. But the conversations that we've been having with vendors make it clear that for the vast majority of people, it's become unaffordable, this food. So flour, I was told by these vendors, has doubled in price. Cooking oil, which is obviously one of the basic necessities, has more than doubled in price. And that's not even before you start talking about the very real changes and the impact that they've had as the Taliban has gradually become firmer in implementing its vision or version of Sharia law.
South Korea has announced it will phase out semi-basement apartments after heavy rains claimed several lives earlier this week. If you've ever watched the Oscar-winning South Korean film Parasite, you'll remember the cramped semi-basement apartment in Seoul where the Kim family lived, and the claustrophobic scene when it flooded during a rainstorm. Nemo Kim is a journalist based in Seoul with more on the history of the apartments.
They started getting incorporated into new buildings back in the 1970s when the South Korean government was still very much focused on defending the people of South Korea from possible North Korean attacks. So when new buildings were being built from that time, it was mandatory to have these semi-basement places in case of a North Korean attack. A lot of people are choosing to live in the Seoul metropolitan area with low income. They have no other choice but to go for these 반지하 semi-basement places. There is no detail on where these people will be moved to, especially considering that the Seoul area has like the highest housing costs in the country. The level of suffering and damage seems to be getting worse every time these floods happen here. We've got rubbish, garbage thrown into drains on the streets every day, like cigarette butts and so on, and they get mixed up with mud during heavy rainfalls, and they end up blocking drains and, end up blocking the whole system. When these floods come around, then this badly working system collapses. So basically, the city government as well as the central government, they have to be seen to be doing something.
More than 10,000 medical workers have been sent to a Chinese island to help with a COVID outbreak. Some tourists finally have been allowed to leave, but tens of thousands are still stuck. CNN's Christy Lou Stout reports.
It's China's tropical island paradise, Hainan. Known for its sandy beaches and extravagant resorts, a coveted destination for Chinese travelers like Li Zifeng, an engineer from Shanghai.
I chose to come to Sanya because the COVID restrictions are more relaxed than in Shanghai.
But for Li and some 80,000 tourists, their island getaway turned into a nightmare. Officials hastily imposed a lockdown in the resort city of Sanya to curb a COVID-19 outbreak. From Saturday, public transport was suspended, people's movements restricted, and tourists were required to stay for 7 days and clear 5 COVID-19 tests before leaving. Sudden flight cancellations led to chaos at the airport. In this widely circulated video, a local official tries in vain to placate dozens of frustrated travelers. He says the government will assist with room and board, but it's not enough. We want to go home, they say. In heavy rain, residents and visitors queue for mandatory COVID tests.
Oh my God, look how big the queue is. Oh my God, what is going on? To the back of the queue, to the back of the queue.
And across China, a number of domestic tourist hotspots have been struck by zero-COVID lockdowns. Last month, more than 2,000 tourists were trapped in the resort town of Beihai. Meanwhile, cases are rising in Xinjiang and even Tibet, which had been COVID-free for almost 3 years. With overseas travel still banned and domestic tourist destinations struck by the virus, the summer has ended early for many Chinese vacation goers. The first batch of stranded tourists have started to leave Hainan, and Li is still waiting for his trip home. You endured the lockdown in Shanghai. You're now under lockdown in Sanya. How do you cope?
For someone who has endured a 3-month lockdown in Shanghai, I am keeping a steady peace of mind because this is a kind of natural disaster. It's out of our control.
Li says because he's in a high-risk zone with confirmed cases, he must stay put for another week or so. Under lockdown yet again, but this time with an ocean view.
Right, that's almost it from us, but before we go, a little bit of feedback on, could have been Mayor Malloy. He won't be Mayor, he's just pulled out today, in case you haven't heard. This person says, I don't like Malloy much, but wow, he is a wonderful breath of fresh air. That's one way of putting it. His departure from the mayoralty race could be a real loss for Auckland, but some will breathe a sigh of relief. He's just another tall poppy, this person says. And someone else says, I'll be voting for a Fesor. I think he will be very regal. Regal, such a nice word, such a nice way of putting it. To the All Blacks. We'll leave on the All Blacks because that is the big news, going to be the big news of the weekend. This person says, rugby union shouldn't be worried if the All Blacks lose. The real concern is that lots of NZ don't care. Well, I care. I think it's nice to have a little bit of pride in your national rugby team. What's wrong with that? Go the All Blacks. Go the All Blacks. We just want to see you do well. That's all. Right. One more thing from Mark. I think South Africa will win and the ABs will play with 14 players due to a red card from trying too hard. Let's hope not. That's it from us. Tune in to First Up on Monday. Will it be celebrations or commiserations from the All Blacks? Will they still have a coach? I guess we'll find out. Nathan with all the info on Monday morning, First Up live from 5. That's it from Checkpoint. Do have a great weekend and look after each other.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Mayoral candidate Leo Malloy told Checkpoint that the most recent poll indicated the results could slant to the left if he remained in the running, and says there's no cover-up with his decision not to run. The Labour Chief Whip says there were issues between Labour MP Gaurav Sharma and his staff. Auckland police are trying to identify human remains found at a house in Clendon Park yesterday. And 8 of the dolphins which had been stranded on Waiheke Island are heading back out to sea. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tomorrow at midday on Mapuna, we mark the first year since the Afghan capital Kabul fell to the Taliban by talking to Fauzia Kufi, a former Afghan MP who survived multiple assassination attempts and is now in exile. And Mere Boynton will be with us to lift the lid on festivities celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Māori language petition. That's Mapuna, tomorrow at midday on RNZ National.
Kia ora koutou, you're listening to RNZ National. I'm Charlotte Ryan, in for Brian Crump, who's feeling a little bit crook tonight, so he's tucked in at home for another evening. Coming up after 7, it's your weekly Sonic Tonic. And as today's the anniversary of John Walker breaking the world mile record, tonight's music is dedicated to winning. My question for you tonight is, when did you last have a win? Big or small, you can text me 2101 or email nights@rnz.co.nz. It's just on 28 minutes to 7. It's time for Focus on Politics.
Kia ora, ko Casey Scott Chiraho, ane te pūrongo tōrangapū mō tēnei wiki. Welcome to Focus on Politics.
I, Samuel Julian Uffendale, solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm.
Just 7 days after being sworn in as the MP for Tauranga, Sam Uffendale's political career hangs in the balance. The self-described school bully is facing allegations of terrorising a former flatmate.
We've stood Sam down, and what that means is that he won't be participating in our caucus.
On Monday, the news website Stuff revealed Sam Uffindell was expelled from Auckland's King's College after beating a younger student in his dorm late at night. Mr Uffindell admitted the incident shortly after news broke and described it as the stupidest thing he'd ever done.
It was the end of the year, end of my fifth form, and we ran into the third formers' dorm, raided them with three other students, and I punched a student in there numerous times in the arm and the body. And
Mr Uffindell said the attack was by far the worst he'd ever been involved in, but went on to describe himself as being a bit of a thug at school and said he'd hurt other students both physically and mentally.
Look, I mean, I might have tackled a few people or punched a few people, you know, like as I said, I was a bully at school, and I'm not proud of that at all. And
Mr Uffindell told reporters he'd matured in the years since and worked hard to be a better person. He said after 2 decades, he reached out to the victim in July last year to apologise. 9 months later, he put his hand up to represent National in the Tauranga by-election. He was adamant the timing of his apology had no link to his political aspirations.
I've reflected on this over the years, and when we got back to New Zealand, then I wanted to atone for this. It had a significant bearing on my life and changed the direction of it a fair bit, and obviously it had an emotional and physical impact on that person as well. And it's part of being a mature adult, able to empathise now, and which I wasn't very good at as a child or as a teenager. I wanted to reach out and apologise, and it was a genuine apology.
The victim told Stuff Mr Uffindell did not mention his political intentions